I wish you luck in realizing your ambition.
Hey everyone, it's BlueLizardJello and welcome to Everything Possible in Elden Ring. This will be my most ambitious and large-scale project ever. If you're new to the Everything Possible series, here is what you can expect. Everything Possible is a series of walkthroughs that I've been doing on the From Software games, Dark Souls 1, 2, and 3, as well as Sekiro so far, and I aim them to be the most comprehensive walkthroughs available on YouTube. It's not simply how to beat the game, it's not simply how to become proficient at the game, but it really, in my mind, is to help new and veteran players alike to experience the games in a different way, to appreciate them mechanically, artistically, to appreciate the story and all the thoughts that went into creating these games. It's not just to help you beat the final boss. I want you to slow down a little bit, follow along with me as much as possible, or just sit back and watch and enjoy, and really take in the game from a fresh perspective. With this guide, you should be able to collect every bit of loot, and I am talking about every shiny, more about that when we actually get into the game itself. It will help you to understand how the different classes and stats work, how the different builds work, how the crafting works and boss strategies, how to come across different situations maybe in different ways than you're used to give you a wider, bigger appreciation for this already enormous game. So without any further ado, let's jump into a brand new game. We're going to be, of course, starting with a new character. I'll be walking you through a little bit of the character creation process, and for some of you who may be very familiar with this game or just From Software games in general, some of this is going to be extremely low level. It's going to be basic for you. I do intend on having timestamps for all the major categories that I talk about, so if you want to skip over character creation and a discussion of the stats and the starting gifts, go right ahead, and I'll have those timestamps available. It should actually create chapters within the video itself. So let's dive into a new game. Now, in order to start creating our character, first we have to select our character base. The character base is essentially the starting class, which is just that, a starting class. It is not the class that you will be stuck with for the entirety of your playthrough. In fact, you can change this up extremely quickly if you don't like the stats or you don't like the gear. You can even get a chance to reallocate your stats later on. Kind of a lot later on, but you can never go below the stats that you begin with. So speaking of stats, so let's take a look at those, and you can see in the bottom left, I can show attributes by hitting Y. I'm actually using a PlayStation controller, so it's going to be triangle for me. And if you're a mouse and keyboard user, I'm sorry, I don't know what those controls are. You can find them in the settings option of the game, or there are plenty of guides out there that'll just kind of walk you through and show you what a controller button correlates, or how a controller button correlates to a keyboard, and I'll try to find a guide and link that in the description below. But first, let's just go down the line and read about what these different stats do, so that way when we're talking about the actual starting classes themselves, you can have an understanding for what they may be best for. So first off, we have our starting level. Every class does start with a different starting level, all the way from level 1 all the way up to level 10, and we'll talk a little bit about that as we discuss each of the character bases. So the vigor, this is your health. This is the stat that governs your hit points. It also affects fire resistance and immunity. Your mind determines your FP, your focus points. Essentially, this is your mana pool. If you're going to be using incantations or spells or the skills and ashes of war that we come across during our playthrough, you will need FP, and that is increased by increasing your mind. It also affects your focus. Now, some of these words we're not going to go into right now, like immunity and focus. We will talk about that when we can actually look at the full character stat page once we're in the game. Then we have endurance, which governs how much stamina, how much can we do during combat. One of the best quality of life updates that From Software has included in Elden Ring that is not present in their older games is the fact that stamina is not consumed outside of combat. If you are not in combat, you can sprint endlessly. Does not reduce stamina, which is just an absolutely fantastic addition. It also affects robustness, and it determines how heavy your equipment can be, so this affects your equipment load. Strength, this is an attribute required to wield heavy armaments. In other words, the bigger the weapon, the more strength you need to wield it, which does make sense. Now, any weapon or any armament that does have strength scaling will also be boosted by increasing your strength. Something that is carried over from other games, though, is that by two-handing a weapon, you are effectively raising your strength by 50%, so you'll actually get a bonus to your damage if there's strength scaling on it. But another way to look at that is the strength requirement on any given weapon can be reduced by 33%, or 1/3, by two-handing a weapon. Dexterity, similarly to strength, this affects your ability to wield armaments that require advanced dexterity. This is also going to boost any attack power of dexterity scaling armaments, but it also does a few things that maybe you weren't aware of, like it reduces the casting time of spells, it can actually lessen fall damage, and it does make it harder to be knocked off your horse. So if you do a lot of horse-mounted combat, higher dexterity can help you out there. Intelligence, this is the stat required in order to perform sorceries. You will have to have a minimum intelligence in order to cast that, unless it is something that you were given through an Ash of War, a skill that you can put on a weapon. We'll talk more about those as we start to collect them. But it also, of course, boosts the magic power of intelligence scaling sorceries and improves magic resistance. Not just sorceries, however, but as you get the option to change the affinity of some of your weapons, you can actually change the scaling to intelligence, or at least you can add intelligence scaling, which will help to boost the magic damage of that armament. And then you have faith, very similar to intelligence, just for incantations versus sorceries. So this is the stat required to perform sacred incantations, and it'll boost the magic power of faith scaling incantations or armaments, again, if you add the faith scaling modifier, or if it already has faith scaling on it. And then lastly, we have arcane. This changes your discovery, your item discovery, so you'll find more and essentially better loot the higher your arcane is. But it also boosts your holy defense, vitality, and certain sorceries and incantations. They may have an arcane requirement and scaling on them, but it also is really useful in increasing the status effect buildup on weapons such as blood, poison, sleep, and madness. And that can be really useful, especially early on, because bleed can be extremely powerful. So now we're actually going to go through each of the character bases to look at what are their strengths and weaknesses and what gear do they start with. First off, you can see in the right box on all of the starting equipment, there is that little icon, and well, that is the Memory of Grace. That's an item that every class starts with, and by using this, you forfeit all runes and you go back to the last site of grace that you rested at. I'm going to tell you right now, because fast travel is a thing that is almost never needed. There may be times where for some reason you get stuck and you're not able to actually access the map because you may be in combat, but maybe you're out of bounds on the map. You could in theory use that, give up all your runes instead of just shutting the game off and potentially ruining your save file, which can happen. So first we have the Vagabond. I'm going to tell you right now, this is the class we're going to be starting with for this playthrough. I do think it is one of the best, not necessarily the only choice, but one of the best starting classes for new players. It has the highest vigor, so it has the highest HP. It does have the lowest arcane, but it is tied with Samurai for the highest strength and dexterity combination. And the reason I bring up strength and dexterity combination is that is essentially the basis for a quality build. And it also opens up a myriad of opportunities for trying out different weapons and armaments through the game. But not only that, the weapons they start with are very good, which is the longsword and the halberd, but you also get the heater shield, which is a 100% physical damage reduction shield. In other words, if you block with this, yes, you'll take stamina damage, but you won't take any physical damage, which can be really, really useful. And in order to get another one in the game, it actually can take a little while. Next, we have the Warrior. This has the highest dexterity, and what's really fun about the Warrior is you can use power stancing immediately because you start with 2 scimitars. Power stancing is something we're going to go into once our character has the ability to do that, but if you have played Dark Souls 2, you may very well be familiar with it. Oh, by the way, the Vagabond starts with the Vagabond Knight armor set, which you can see on him. The Warrior starts with the 2 scimitars, riveted wooden shield, and then the blue cloth and the Warrior armor set. The Warrior, it does have the highest dex, as I mentioned. It doesn't have the lowest stat in anything, which is kind of nice. Then we have the hero. It has the highest strength in the game. It is tied for the lowest intelligence, however, with the prophet. So if you want to use sorceries later on, you may have to do some more investment into intelligence, but again, that can absolutely be worked with. The hero starts with the battle axe, a large leather shield, and the champion armor set. Then we have the bandit. It has the second lowest level, and that might actually seem like a negative, but I see it as a positive. The lower your starting level, the lower the requirement for runes is early on in order to level up. So the difference between the bandit and then the highest level, which is actually the confessor, that's 5 levels. And as the levels go up and the number of runes incrementally increases, you can get more levels for the same amount of runes from a bandit, which just gives you more variety and flexibility early on. But not only that, the bandit has the highest arcane, and it starts with a great knife, which is really good for inflicting bleed because the great knife does have that bleed buildup. But also it comes with a buckler. The buckler is the only shield in the game that has the unique skill buckler parry, as the name would suggest. And the buckler parry is one of the best skills for learning how to parry for new players because it has one of the biggest windows. I say one of because there are some other options much later in the game using Ashes of War that can actually improve your ability to parry, but we'll talk about that when we get it. But if you want to learn parrying, bandit can be a great option. It also starts with a short bow, and it does start with 30 bone fletched arrows, and of course you start with the bandit armor set. Next we have the astrologer. This is the one that I did my entire blind playthrough on, and it was a blast. The astrologer has the highest mind and intelligence, so the highest amount of FP and the highest intelligence stat. It does have the lowest vigor. So this is, you start rather squishy. You have the lowest health, so you're gonna stand back and you're gonna pew pew. I mean, that is what this is there for. It does start with Glintstone Pebble and Glintstone Arc, and Glintstone Arc has an incredible DPS potential due to its ability to pierce and spread out and take out very, very large groups of enemies very quickly. It also starts with a short sword, the astrologer staff, the scripture wooden shield, and an astrologer armor set. Next, we have the prophet. The prophet has the highest faith, really good for casting sacred incantations, of course, the lowest endurance, so not a whole lot of stamina to play with, and it is tied for the lowest intelligence with hero. In terms of what it starts with, you start with the heal sacred incantation, catch flame, so you have a bit of a pyromancy build going on, short spear, the finger seal, which allows you to cast incantations, the rickety shield, and then the prophet is, the armor is the prophet armor set, but interestingly enough, you don't have any gloves, as that picture would lead you to believe. Then you have the samurai. The samurai has the highest endurance, so you can just swing that weapon for days. Starts with the Uchi Katana, which is good for bleed buildup, and it starts with the longbow, and it starts not only with the longbow, which has the mighty shot skill, but you also start with fire arrows and regular arrows. Fire arrows plus mighty shot early on, really, really useful. Then we have the prisoner, which is not the highest in any stat. It is the lowest in the faith at only 6, but it's actually fairly well rounded other than that. It does start with magic glint blade, which is a really fun sorcery. And then in terms of the starting equipment, you have the S-Stock, the Glintstone Staff, a Rift Shield, and then the Prisoner Armor set again, with no gloves. Nearly done. We do have the Confessor up next. The Confessor, it starts with the highest level at level 10, meaning that leveling up for the Confessor is going to cost a bit more than any other of the starting classes. It is not the highest in any stat, but it is also not the lowest in any stat. It does start with the Assassin's Approach Incantation, which can be really fun for sneaking up on enemies because it makes your footsteps silent, and it can also help to reduce your fall damage. The Confessor starts with Urgent Heal, so another healing incantation, the Assassin's Approach Incantation, which I just mentioned, the Broadsword, which interestingly enough, we just learned the other day, Broadsword is only found in one other area. It's available early on, but if you wanted to power stance broadswords, then the Confessor is your only option unless you can get someone to drop one for you, because you can only get one other in the game. Starts with the Finger Seal and then the Blue Crest Heater Shield, similar to the Heater Shield of the Vagabond, but actually worse in terms of elemental reduction and the guard boost stability, or the stability of the shield. And it starts with the Confessor armor set. And then lastly, we have the Wretch. Now the Wretch is an interesting character. This is level 1, so this is going to be your only option if you want to go for a rune level 1 build. 10s across the board, but that's not actually that bad. I would argue that some of the other characters, if you stick at base level, are more difficult to play than actually a Wretch at level 1, because having 10, especially in things like Intelligence and Faith and Arcane, open up more possibilities than the other classes if, again, you don't level them up. If you do a base level challenge, some of the other ones I would argue are more difficult than the Wretch. And in terms of starting equipment, you start with a club. And actually the club is not bad, because having a blunt weapon early on can make some of the early catacombs a little bit easier, because anything that has hard skin, and we're going to talk about toughness and hardness later on, it makes it so your weapons don't just bounce off of them, which can really be a problem. But as I said, we are going to be starting with the Vagabond. Now I have created a character offline already that I'm rather happy with, so I will be using that to actually fill in my character creation. I will be choosing a type B body type, but it doesn't really matter because I'm going to be changing that using a base template. So I am going to, instead of just choosing a base template, I am going to go to my detailed appearance and I'm going to load a favorite. I only have one right now, but there they are. And I will, if you'd like, go ahead and post the sliders in the description below. I think that is something that is kind of fun to do. That way, in case you want to create a similar looking character, you absolutely can. And in terms of name, we are going with Argentum Filia. Let me know down in the comments if you know how I came up with that name. It's not all that clever, but I was pretty happy with it. The next thing we need to talk about, though, before we finally get into the opening cutscene, is the Keepsake. This is your starting gift. There are some that are really, really useful, others that are kind of an odd choice to begin with, but to each their own. But let's talk about each one. Of course, you can start with absolutely nothing. Past has been well and truly left behind. Then we have the Crimson Amber Medallion. All of these, by the way, I should mention, can be picked up in the game. There is nothing, well, technically, the only one you can't get in the game is a Lands Between rune, and I'll talk about that in a second. But the Crimson Amber Medallion, this medallion, when worn, increases your HP by 6%. Okay, not terrible, not great. The Lands Between rune, this is unique only in that it's the only one of its name in the game, and it gives you 3,000 runes when you consume it. The Golden Seed. This is a very strong contender for the best starting gift, especially for new players, because immediately, once you're able to heal, that is, you can increase the number of flask usage. Okay, you get 1 extra flask charge if you start with the Golden Seed. Now the thing with the Golden Seed, though, is you get more, if you explore, that is, you get more Golden Seeds than you need to maximize the number of usages that you get out of your flasks. So if you want an extra one at the beginning, not a bad idea. Fanged Imp Ashes, I absolutely love this spirit summon. You can, of course, pick this up, but it is somewhat down the road unless you kind of hightail it to it. You can do that, but this is a spirit summon that as soon as you get the ability to summon these spirits, you can use the Fanged Imp Ashes. They do get outclassed later on, but early game, they can solo some of the fights for you. A Cracked Pot, not a terrible idea, but with the Cracked Pot, you do get the ability to buy some very, very quickly, and we're going to be doing just that. You do get 3 of them here, not just the one, but this allows you the ability, once you unlock the crafting ability, to create throwables, and some of the consumable throwing items are very strong early on. Stone Sword Key, you get 2 of these. There are some fog walls that are locked behind imp statues, and they require either 1 or 2 of these Stone Sword Keys, but kind of like the Golden Seed, you can obtain enough to get all of the imp doors open and then still have some keys left over. So unless you want to do an incredible challenge run early on and go right into the first imp door that you see, maybe you don't need the Stone Sword Key. Now we start to get into the even less useful ones, in my opinion. We have the Bewitching Branch. You get 5 of these. It's nice that this comes from the demigod Mikola. Okay, you get a little bit of lore right there. But the Bewitching Branches, it actually convinces an enemy to fight for you for 3 minutes, which seems really great, except it doesn't work on all enemies, and it seems a little bit finicky, but it can be fun for dealing with invaders. If you get invaded and you use a Bewitching Branch on an enemy, they will actually attack the invader for you. The boiled prawn, you get 5 of these. This boosts your physical damage negation. It's about 15% physical damage negation, but we're going to talk about buffs and which buffs can stack with others later on, because there are differences between item buffs or weapon buffs and body buffs, and some stack, some don't, so we'll have to talk about that. And then there's Shabriri's Woe. This attracts enemy aggression. Playing solo offline, this doesn't really seem to have any effect. Even in co-op, the effect is limited, but essentially what it's supposed to do is draw enemies aggro onto you, whereas your co-op partners, maybe if they're range or they're spellcasters, they can, basically you're the tank. I've tried it, it's okay, it doesn't seem to work all the time, but I'm gonna tell you, it's a really hard toss-up between Golden Seed and Lands Between Rune. You can go whichever starting keepsake you like. I'm actually going to go with the Lands Between Rune because there's a number of things that I can purchase very early on at the first merchant I find that I would like to do so without doing a lot of farming. It just speeds it up a bit. So I'm going to actually choose the Lands Between Rune. And finally, we can finish the character creation and we can watch the opening cutscene for Elden Ring.
Fallen leaves tell a story. The great Elden Ring was shattered. In our home, across the fog, the lands between. Now, Queen Marika the Eternal is nowhere to be found. And in the night of the Black Knives, Godwyn the Golden was first to perish. Soon, Marika's offspring, demigods all, claimed the shards of the Elden Ring. The mad taint of their newfound strength triggered the shattering. A war from which no lord arose. A war leading to abandonment by the greater will. Oh, rise now, ye tarnished, ye dead who yet live. The call of long-lost grace speaks to us all. Horalu, chieftain of the Badlands, the ever-brilliant Gold Mask. Fear, the deathbed companion, the loathsome Dung-Eater, and Sir Gideon Othmere, the all-knowing. And one other, whom grace would again bless. A tarnished of no renown. Cross the fog to the lands between. to stand before the Elden Ring and become the Elden Lord.
So we, as a Tarnished of no renown, apparently are supposed to become the Elden Lord. That is essentially what that cutscene all breaks down to being. Although there's a lot more to it, many of the Tarnished having been dead and now have been resurrected and have seemingly some fame behind them. And here we are with no renown whatsoever, but it's our job to become Elden Lord. Now I start with the ring gesture, and if you pre-ordered the game, then you will start with this as well. If you didn't pre-order the game, you can still get the ring gesture, but you do need to play online. Now, for this walkthrough, I will be offline 99.9% of the time. The only time that I'll actually go online is to showcase some of the online features, co-op, summoning pools, messages, possibly PvP, but in general, this walkthrough is going to be offline, so I won't be able to showcase all of the things all the time. This gesture, however, you can obtain it without pre-ordering by playing with someone who did pre-order the game, whether that is co-op or PvP. If someone joins your game or you join someone's game and they pre-ordered the game, you will also get the ring gesture. It kind of perpetuates very, very quickly. So if you play online, chances are you'll get this gesture very, very quickly. Now, just a real quick note on gestures. If you want to use them or to switch them out, hit your menu button. Over on the right-hand side, you have 6 slots for your gestures. Now, fortunately, motion control gestures are a thing of the past, and I hope they stay that way. But for now, we can just select any one of these to perform that gesture. And if we want to switch one out for, let's say, the ring gesture or one of the other ones that's not currently on this hotbar, so to speak, we can just use the button in the bottom right corner to switch it out. One quick note. Previously, I was on the PC. So the character creation and the cutscenes were on PC. This is now the PS5 version. I did some test recordings, and the PC version, unfortunately, with the FPS stutters that it has due to the shader caching, it is not going to be conducive to this walkthrough. So it will be on PS5 going forward. But to switch it out, I'm going to hit switch, and then I can choose which one I want. I'll put on the ring, and now that is now my gesture for that slot. We'll talk about the item pouch another time, as well as all the items or the options over here on the left. So we're in the Chapel of Anticipation. If you try to open this door, it actually tells you, interestingly enough, that it only opens to those carrying a finger. Fortunately for us, over here on the body of this maiden, this bloodied maiden, hint, hint, keep that in mind, we get the Tarnished Wizened Finger. This is this game's version of the messaging system. Because I'm offline, it's not going to do me any good, but if I was online, this would allow me to leave messages, either helpful or unhelpful or just being ridiculous, in order to help or not other players. The beautiful thing about the message system, though, is if you do leave a message that is either helpful or just silly and gets a lot of upvotes, it will heal you every time if you are playing online, and it can save your bacon. If you are fighting a boss and you're out of healing, and it does happen, the message system could potentially save that fight for you. So you can choose whether to be very helpful and showcase some illusory walls or some hidden paths, or you can just be absolutely ridiculous with the messages and the gestures that you can apply to them and get some free healing. The developer message is one example of these messages, but this again is just the developer since I am offline. It says, "Though the path be broken and uncertain, claim your place as Elden Lord." As we step outside, there's the name of the place that we're in, the Chapel of Anticipation. There is the giant glorious Erd Tree. We have this large castle. We have a bridge and some large towers over in the distance. We also have some land over to kind of the southeast there. We'll actually be going there rather quickly. And just over there, just under that statue, is going to be our very first boss. Now, in this walkthrough, I am going to show you how to beat this boss. I do already have a video how to defeat this boss as a samurai class with the longbow and mighty shot, but now I'm going to show you how to do it with melee, and this tactic works with any of the melee. I've done it now with every class just to make sure it is viable. It is 100%, and you can play this about as safe or as risky as you'd like. First though, we have to talk a little bit about combat mechanics, the at least the basics, as well as, well, you're rolling. Because if I try to roll right now, that is not going to be conducive to my own health. But if I go into my menu, and then I go to my equipment, over on the right-hand side where it says equip load, I'm at 38.8 out of 49.8. That is the maximum I can wear before I really can't move at all, or very, very slowly. And it says that I'm under a heavy load. If I just go to the Vagabond Knight helm though and unequip it, and you can again see those buttons down in the bottom right, or bottom left rather, I can remove it with square, and now I'm medium load. This drastically changes the speed and distance of my roll, and with that, the number of frames that I have invincibility for. We call those the iframes, the invincibility frames. If we go to light, it is even longer and faster. In fact, I think it was just in patch 1.06 that extended the length of the fast rolling even more. So very viable. If you want to dodge, make sure you are at least in medium load. Otherwise, you may just have a bad time. Notice on the left-hand side though where it says parry. That is my weapon skill. We're going to talk a lot about skills and Ashes of War, which is how you change skills later on throughout this playthrough. They are key and pivotal to your survival and, in my opinion, to your enjoyment of this game. Yes, you can get through the majority, if not all, this game with simple mashing R1. This is viable, this works. But to use the skills really, really makes this game come alive. The skill is typically, not always, but typically determined by the weapon, or armament as this game calls them, in your left hand. There are some that override it. For example, the parry skill, which is on this heater shield, that will override it. So even if I put my shield in my right hand and my longsword in my left, I will still be using the parry skill anytime I use L2, which is the weapon skill button. However, if I were to two-hand my sword, then I will be able to use the weapon skill, which, as we can see here, is known as square off. Square off has two different modes, and most skills, if you actually go in and read it, aren't as straightforward as they seem. Some are very straightforward and they don't even require FP. Some of them have multiple forms. Like for example, this one, I will hold down the skill button, and then to get into the stance where the sword held level, a light attack, R1, will cause me to do a slash upwards through the enemy's guard, potentially breaking their guard, or a strong attack with R2 to perform a running thrust and do more damage. The halberd's skill is charge forth. I can tap it to just do a quick charge forth and end it with a thrust, or I can hold it to cover even greater distance. Reading what the skills do and how they work, and then of course testing them, is going to be how you become familiar with it. But in order to two-hand, it is a little bit different than their previous games. In fact, I would say it's a lot different. Instead of simply hitting Y or triangle, now we have to hold down the interact button. Now for me, this is going to be X because I did switch Y and or triangle and X. And then I'm going to tap either the right or left bumper. If I do the right bumper, let's go from behind just so we have, instead of stage right, we have our right. I will two-hand the sword, the long sword, because that was in my right hand. But then if I do the same thing and tap the left bumper, I'll two-hand my heater shield. Not that I really want to do that, but it is an option. Similarly, the halberd, if I hold in X and do the right, there I am holding on to the halberd in two hands, and then I can put it away. But notice, go back to my longsword, when I two-hand it, the skill changes to square off, and indeed, that is the skill. I'm holding it down, and if I did a light attack, I would do the move that breaks guard, and then if I do the R2, the heavy attack, that is the thrust that does a lot of damage. There are a lot of different combat combinations, and we'll be talking about some of them as we go. You can also do jump attacks, so if I actually jump, I can do a light attack, I can jump and do a nice heavy attack, which does some really, really good stagger bonus and can knock enemies down for a critical. You can roll an attack, you can sprint an attack, you can charge up your R2 for a nice thrust, of course with the longsword, or just tap it for a kind of a lighter heavy attack. Play around with the weapons you enjoy and really, really get to know them. They can be kind of really, really versatile depending on what you're doing. Even the backstep R1, very, very different. Let's go over here. Now this door, it is blocked shut. We can come back here later on. So if you don't want to kill the Grafted Scion now, I don't blame you. It may take you several attempts in order to get this strategy down. Once you do though, I think you'll find it pretty easy. And the rewards, pretty rewarding. You'll get 3,200 runes, you'll get the swords that the Grafted Scion, which is this tutorial boss, carries, and you will get the Great Shield, that he drops. If you don't want to, I get it. You can always come back here another time, that door will be open, and then you can fight him with a much stronger character. But I'm going to be talking about the strategy as we go through, and again, like I said, this will work with any of the classes, even if you didn't start with a 100% block shield. The first thing though is he's going to be appearing over that statue. To get one good free hit, I'm going to use my halberd. Does a little bit more damage, which we haven't really looked at yet. But I'm going to run up there, get right close, one poke, and then I'm just going to back up. And now, I'm actually going to keep the halberd out. I want to show a parry. This is not what I recommend for new players, but I do want to show how I go about it. There's a certain move that I like to bait out, not this one. It's a combo. There it is. 1, 2, 3, 4, thrust, and then 2 more attacks after that. That is my favorite to take him out for 2 methods. Oh, got stuck on a little bit of scenery there. On the 4th swing is when I like to parry after a short delay. So let me see if I can bait it out. Okay, as long as I block, I'm not going to take damage because this is purely physical. So let's see. Thrust, and then 1, 2, 3. No, I missed it. Okay. Whenever he does his stomp attack, I will 2-hand my halberd, get a poke, and then back up. That roar does do physical damage, so if you are close, just put your shield up and you should be able to, well, at least maintain most of it, although it's going to drain your stamina. Let's see if we can bait that again. 1, 2, 3. That was a little bit too early. First one was too late. That one was too early. I'm going to try one more time, and then we'll have to play very carefully. Okay, another stomp. And then we back up. Shield out. Just block it. There we go. And look at that extra damage. 75 plus 349. Excellent. So that is the move that I like to parry. You can do other parries. The problem is, if you do it at the beginning of that combo and he hits you, he's just going to keep swinging. You could likely take additional damage. But now what I'm going to do is I'm going to bait that same combo. I'm going to get my sword out. I'm going to do that same combination. But instead of trying to parry, I'm going to roll after the 4th attack towards him. 3, 4, walk, and then roll. Now he didn't do a follow-up, so I'm not going to try and attack. You have to play this safely if you want to get consistent at this. All right, he's going to do the stomp, so I'll get back to the halberd, 2-hand it, poke, back up, back to the sword. So what I do is when I get behind him, if I see that he's going up for a follow-up, that's when I'll attack. Right here. Okay, get behind him, get behind his back right leg. And what I just did was I did a square off with an R2 for maximum damage. So let's bait another one. 3, 4, walk, roll towards him. There's the follow-up. Make sure you're all the way behind him. And then just roll away. Sometimes you can do a double roll just to be doubly sure, but there we go. Roll. There's the follow-up. Get out of the way with that roar, and he's going to buff now. He's going to use golden tempering. That is the skill of those blades. Now the problem is with this. Okay, he's going to do a stomp, so I'm going to do switch halberd. Is that now his weapons are also dealing holy damage, and our shield does not block 100% holy damage, meaning even if we block his attacks, we won't take any physical damage, but we are going to take chip damage because of that holy now. Dodge. No follow-up, so we don't risk it. We just back up. But we're going to bait that again. Oh, he's going to stomp. When he does that little charge at you, typically means he's going to do the stomp, so just get ready for it. And this likely will take you several attempts, and I completely... Oh, there we go. Nice big jump. Just roll out kind of last second. 3, 2, 3, 4. I can count. Roll backwards or roll behind him. Yeah, that one's always kind of scary. And yep, there you go. And you could be doing jump attacks and potentially knocking him down. You can see golden tempering is worn off. Roll through. There's the follow-up. Good damage. All right. Rolled a little bit prematurely there, which is why I took the hit. If I get hit one more time, that is going to be the end of this fight. But we only have a few more hits, then we'll be able to get him. No follow-up, so I'm not going to risk it. Okay, so you got to delay that roll when he does that big swing. There's a couple attacks we haven't seen yet. It's actually the same attack. It's kind of his charged attack. And he stands up on his back hind legs, and if he is not buffed, like he wasn't just a moment ago, he'll do this whirlwind attack, and you just have to run backwards. And then if he's buffed like this, he'll do this series of really, really quick thrusts. And again, just kind of run away from him. Good, there's the follow-up. Roll away from that roar. Good. 3, 4, roll. There was no follow-up, so I'm not going to risk it. 1, 2, 3, 4, walk, roll towards him. There's the follow-up. And I could have killed him right there, but I didn't want to risk it, so now we just need one more. 1, 2, 3, 4. This time, even if there's not a follow-up, I'm just going to finish him off. There it is, Grafted Scion. I made a few mistakes there, but as you can see, even with some mistakes, you can still get through this fight. The problem is you don't have any healing. The other problem is as soon as your health goes to 0, that's it. You get an instant fade to black, and you are in the cutscene leading you to the tutorial area. So you don't get another go at this. The only way you can heal is if you start as one of the 2 classes that start with a healing incantation. Even then, it's going to be very risky in that fight. But we got 3,200 runes, which do carry over, and we can spend them. And we get the Ornamental Straight Sword, which is actually a pair of swords, and the Golden Beast Crest Shield. Let's take a look at those swords. Unfortunately, we can't wield them, and we're going to talk about stats and what you need in order to wield everything kind of as we pick up items. But as you can see, under the attributes required, almost smack dab in the middle of the screen, we need 10 strength, which we have, and we need 14 dex. Strength, however, we mentioned can be artificially inflated by two-handing a weapon, and you get a 50% bonus. Dex has no such artificial scaling. You can get gear later on and talismans that will raise your dexterity and make it easier without actually leveling dexterity, but we don't have any of that. So now, because it's in red, it says that it needs 14. We have 13. With 1 level up, we could use these, but we can at least show them off. They are a rather good-looking pair of swords. Now, because it's a pair of swords, when we go to two-hand these swords, again by holding down the interact with the right bumper, we take out the second one. This is not the same as power stancing. Power stancing is when you wield 2 different weapons of the same weapon class. Well, they can actually be the same. For example, 2 falchions, 2 scimitars, 2 broadswords, but it has to be within the same class. So you could do like a short sword and a long sword. You could do a broadsword and a Lord Sworn's straight sword, something along those lines. This, however, this is just a pair of swords, meaning when I hit L1, which normally would be the power stance attack, it's just going to be a guard. So it's just going to be a guard. And unfortunately, if I try to use the skill, the Golden Tempering, just like the Scion did, I'll do the move, but even though I have FP, it won't do it because I don't meet the stat requirements. But that Golden Tempering will add a flat 100 holy damage to the swords. These are a really, really good early game weapon because of that flat damage. You'll be over 200 attack power with these weapons without a single upgrade or a single level up. Put my longsword back on, and we got the Golden Beast Crest Shield. It's alright, but it's a rather heavy great shield given the fact that its guard boost is only 60. We'll talk about guard boost and all the damage negation at a later time, but while it's a stylish shield, it's not great, even though it is technically a great shield. But with the Grafted Scion down, let's head over this way and grab our first crafting item, which is a Nascent Butterfly. Now the Nascent Butterfly is something that we're not going to collect too many of until much later on, and we don't even have the ability to craft just yet, but the Nascent Butterflies can craft Dappled Cured Meat and Dappled White Cured Meat, but they also require some ingredients that we won't get till much later, so even then, it won't do us any good. Now as I cross this bridge and approach the next set of Nascent Butterflies, and before we actually approach the cliff, I will say this, I am not going to be using the runes that I just collected, nor am I going to be using the swords or the shield. I'm actually going to redo this character after this episode, die to the Grafted Scion, so we can start the tutorial on the same foot. I fully recognize that most players will not be fighting the Grafted Scion and winning just yet. So for everyone wanting to follow along, if you want to kill him and start with the extra 3,200 runes, great. Then you could even select a different keepsake like a golden seed and still be on the same playing field as I am when we get to our first merchant. For me though, I'm going to kind of wipe the slate clean. I will start with the Lands Between rune, but I'm not going to kill the Grafted Scion on the actual character I'll be running this playthrough with. And even though the prompt to collect the materials did show up, you cannot get those butterflies.
Don't worry, Torrent. Fortune is on her side. We found her here after all. One of her kind is sure to seek the Elden Ring. Even if it does violate the Golden Order.
Even if it violates the Golden Order, that mysterious individual upon her horse believed that maybe there's a bit something to us, and we're going to be meeting her and that horse again pretty soon. But we start off with a flask of Crimson Tears and a flask of Cerulean Tears. We technically have 3 of the Crimson, 1 of the Cerulean. Being that those are our restorative potions, we can use those to heal our HP or our FP respectively. At a Site of Grace, which is this game's version of a bonfire, we can reallocate those. We can have all healing and no FP. We can have no healing and all FP, or a combination of the two. We can also increase its potency if we have items that we'll collect later on, or you can increase the number of usages by having golden seeds, which you could have started with 1 and immediately gotten a leg up on that. But more on that when we get to our first Site of Grace, which is just at the bottom of that cave, which we'll do next time. That is actually going to do it for the first episode of Everything Possible in Elden Ring. It's exciting to be here. It's scary as all get out. I hope you enjoy this. If you did, if you watched till now and you got something out of it, or you just found it entertaining to hear me ramble on and on, do me a favor. Subscribe for more. Hit that like button. I would like to see just how many people are enjoying this content. Also, if you learned something, leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you learned. But if I missed something, or if you have a better strategy for taking on the Grafted Scion, leave that down below as well, so we can all keep learning. But I want to thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time.